Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rob Berkeley. I'm Director of the Runnymede Trust, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the third in our series of race, racism and resistance on film. For those who don't know, Runnymede is a race equality think tank. We were founded in 1968. Our founders thought it would take us 5 years to solve the problems of racism in this country, yet it's our 45th year next year, so you can see how persistent some of these problems are. This is part of a project called Generation 3.0. We wanted to find out from those three generations after major migration in the late 40s and 50s, what's going on about race? What's going on about racism? How do we get to the point where we're ending racism rather than just talking about it endlessly and constantly, year in, year out? We wanted to find a way of reconnecting older people with younger people about this struggle. And we thought there's a really interesting way of doing that would be to look at film over generations, the way people have represented themselves and been represented, so that we've got a sense of where people were, but also what we want from our media now and the representations that we would like going forward. You will probably hear in the discourse in the media, you'll probably hear from what we talk about in terms of racism regularly, that it's a problem of the past. Beyond a few extremists on the football pitch, beyond a few people who choose to vote for some far-right parties, really, the mainstream is not racist anymore, so we should be moving on. But we know that we live in a society in which you're 7 times more likely to be stopped to search on the street if you're black, that if you're a Chinese graduate, you're expected to earn 25% less over the course of your career than a white graduate will. And we also know that in the education system, the results aren't matching up for everybody, and the education system serves some people better than others. So racism still persists. How is it that we move our situation in our society from one which still thinks in terms of race, which still judges people in terms of race, which still makes decisions in terms of race, to one in which people's diverse backgrounds are celebrated, are welcomed, and are recognised as a part of our society going forward, so that your race becomes something which is positive rather than something which is used to marginalise you. So, what we have this evening is an opportunity to look at the media. And the media is really important for a number of reasons. Partly because it's the way in which many of us get our information about the society in which we live in. It's where people often get the opportunity to dream and think about the society that we want to live in. It's a place for debate, and it's a place also for entertainment. So, some questions we're interested in finding some answers to tonight. What does the way we represent ourselves in our media say about us? Are all people and all communities equally represented in a negative and a positive manner? And what's changing? How is this changing, and what do we want to see from the BBC, but also from the other types of media that we use on a regular basis? We've got a pretty packed programme. We've got some really great people going to speak to you tonight, but also with us, because this is a conversation. And I don't want people to feel that their question isn't relevant, or that they're slightly concerned about the language and they're not sure how to frame it. We all here are in a joint spirit of inquiry, trying to find some answers. So I ask people to understand if people use language which we don't think is the language that we would use, but also that we listen to each other as well as offer our own ideas. So we're going to start off with a lecture, a fantastic lecture from a fantastic person, followed by a panel which is going to be amazing, because they're going to bring their experiences of working in the media, using the media, analysing the media, to bear onto this subject. You probably heard in the recorded announcement the request to switch off your phones. Don't switch them off. don't want to be in the film, can you make that clear to somebody who stood next to a camera, and then make sure that we try and edit you out if at all possible. So I think that's all my announcements. Yes, that's all my announcements. So we're going to start with our lecture presentation from Karen Gallagher. Karen is an award-winning independent filmmaker who's made films documenting Manchester's heritage and also African Caribbean heritage nationally. Karen is also a producer and director in TV and a BBC radio presenter. So, Karen, over to you.
Hello everyone. This evening I hope to give you an insight into my perspective of how race resistance and racism has been reflected on British television and also on film. I think it's important for us to reflect on this not only from a national perspective but from a Mancunian perspective, as we can learn from the footage how filmmaking can move towards breaking down the barriers of racism within our neighbourhoods and peer groups. My experience within the screen industry has been varied. I've worked on quite a lot of popular culture programmes, music programmes and entertainment programmes for BBC, ITV and Channel 4. But whenever we've tried to make programmes that tackle racism or reflect race, that's been a really difficult task over the years that I've worked in television. It's something that actually the medium is actually quite resistant to taking on. Commissioners are much more tentative about dealing with these issues today than they were 50 years ago. You might be quite surprised at that, but I'll show you that through some of the clips that we'll see today. Historically, the experience of the Commonwealth was and still is kind of the main point of entertainment that television and film wants to tackle. Their view is often that they'll give the ordinary people of Britain an insight into how settlers in this country went about their everyday lives at home and abroad. Race was often discussed on British television in the 1950s and 60s, particularly in programmes like Panorama, which still exists today, Man Alive and Monitor, and also often within drama. But I've often found that when looking through the archives of film and television, programme makers from 30 and 40 years ago were far more open to discussing heritage, people's cultures, than they are today. And even though, you might look back and the coverage was often patronising, more often than not it wasn't, and people were educated through watching the programmes that were made. And when you look at that, you wonder why that was. Perhaps it's just because the programme makers back then were more curious, but also because they were given much more time to make television programmes than they are today. But sadly, not many people of colour had a TV back then, so no one was aware of what was being screened, so they haven't got that perspective of knowing that the issues of racism have diminished in terms of gaining TV coverage. The lack of harmony between cultures was openly discussed years ago, mainly about the issue of housing. That was often reported on, the difficulties people found in places to live, and the racial tensions that existed was covered by television for many years. And I want to show you first this clip, which was a phrase that you may have heard when people talk about racism: no Irish and no blacks. Now, this perspective is something that was experienced by many people: Irish, Caribbean, Africans, Indians, Pakistanis who came to live in the UK. But what's missing from these records, you can see it's here, is that you don't often hear the perspective of the people who were suffering the racism. The journalist speaks for them, and there's little record of how people felt on film. And there's more documentation in areas like the Midlands and London, but in Manchester there really isn't that much that documents people's experiences in terms of being on screen and film. Orally, that information is captured. So the difficulties that people face when they were sharing homes with several people, several families, the issues many people faced working in hospitals, having to create their own churches and their own youth projects. These struggles were documented, but the footage is rare, and when you do see, it's often the same footage lifted perhaps from one programme that's been made over a period of, it was made 20 or 30 years ago, and that was it. The cultural influence was discussed, for instance, in programmes presented by the journalist Alan Wicker, who went on to make the travel programme Wicker's World. Musically, it was covered in Ready, Steady, Go and programmes like Top of the Pops. Cricket, music though, and civil rights were all the defining moments for those people growing up in the 50s and 60s. And that was covered in travel programmes in particular. They were a great way to bring the story of the newcomer, the new settler, to the British audience. And I'll show you that in this clip, featuring a very young and dark as Howe. So you can see in that piece of material that reggae music was used in a way to get the political message over of how Caribbean felt as well. And reggae music was often, when you look back through the records, is something that's used to connect with audiences. It was quite a powerful way. It really did change people's, particularly English people's, perspective on Caribbean people. And you see that when you look through the records. What is different though is that the same wasn't the case for people of African heritage. It's quite difficult to still, screen footage of how African people were depicted, particularly in programmes that the BBC made, because of language issues and also because of the landscape of those countries. It wasn't easy for them to kind of go around and do travel programmes and to show Africans a great life. So it's actually really quite negative, the images that exist of Africa, and that's often why you still don't see them historically on television. What did happen though was that as the 70s came in, that perspective changed, but it still was very limited. But within dramas, the issues of race and racial tensions were documented. Race was discussed in Sheila Delaney's hit play, the film A Taste of Honey. And that's of course the northern tale of a young white girl who falls pregnant to a black sailor, and that film, that was a film and a play. The play was written in 1959. But also, there was a Jamaican playwright who died early this year called Barry Record, and he discussed interracial relationships in a play that was screened on Granada television in 1962, and that was made right here. Now this is, I don't think this has been seen, apart from one screening at Talbot Theatre this year. It's not been seen since this was originally shown in 1962. So that was You Ignore Small Corner. What's quite interesting about that is it's a black playwright writing from his own perspective, and many playwrights and people who want to make dramas today complain about the fact that they're not given that opportunity, and if they wanted to document race, it's very difficult to get that permission now. So it's quite a rare thing that it was done by Barry Record, and that was 50 years ago. But we're going to look now at how Manchester's viewed by the media 50 years on, because generally the view that's been hard to shape for Manchester is that we're still dominated by gangs, and even 2 years ago a politician described Moss Side as being similar to The Wire, saying that the streets of Moss Side were similar to the streets of Baltimore, and people are still not aware from the perspective of, still not aware about the areas of Manchester that exist aside from Moss Side. They don't know about areas like Longsight, Rusholme, Wythenshawe. Programmes rarely reference the people that live within the Manchester area. Television programmes did used to document them. Programmes like Omnibus and Man Alive did reflect the black British experience in Manchester. But again, that footage was very limited. But what isn't limited is the images of gun crime and gun culture that exists. So that's why it's quite easy for programme makers to always go back to that image. So now I'm going to see some clips of a film that I produced and directed in collaboration with the North West Film Archive, using local archive images, home movie footage and BBC footage. And the reason for this was to kind of correct the record and document the experience of people that did live in Moss Side or visited Moss Side. Did have a very strong Irish community, a very strong Sikh community, and a very strong Caribbean community, and also some of the first Somalians that settled in Manchester, but that is often not documented anywhere. So in order to make the 30-minute film, which I'm going to show you 2 clips, We spoke to young people who lived in the area, 3 generations of Sikh families, business owners who were Irish Somalian, and also first and second generation Caribbean. The first generation talked about facing many challenges, housing, poverty, and the struggles that they had to get their children educated. But as discussed here, they all say that they did kind of live happily together. So I'll just show you a few minutes of this in terms of how people live together. But when I was actually doing the research, that was people shared experiences. People were always talking about it, but people working in the media and film didn't really want to hear that story. They wanted to hear the story of the fact that people didn't get on or that they clashed. The one thing that people did say caused consternation amongst each other was interracial relationships, but I knew that that had been documented, so I actually decided to go for the other elements, through the shared experiences that all the generations were telling me about, and include that in the film, because it's important sometimes to have a true legacy and reflect what people are telling you rather than what you want to put into a film. In the second part of, but it's interesting again to hear the perspective of the people who were growing up there and how they viewed what happened in the 1980s. So it's ended up here. So that was the residents of Mossine talking about growing up in the area during the 60s, 70s and 80s. And one thing that I think is important to consider is that first and second generations who speak about their shared experience say that they often did that while still preserving their own heritage. The older generations who I've spoken to and I'll still speak to, they say that there's a problem with how we discuss our experiences today, because we talk about our individual Muslim experience or our Jamaican experience, that actually that we're creating problems and that shared experience is disappearing. So there's a bit of a divide in how the older generations see the young generations, and they are worried that racism isn't going to go away because those shared experiences, like those people talk about in film, are kind of disappearing. It'd be interesting to know what you as young people think about that. But I'll leave you something that the singer Nona Hendrix said this weekend on Radio 4 programme. She picked Billie Holiday's song Strange Fruit, and she said that she wanted to leave that as an inheritance track for young people, because she's saying that you should be willing to be open to others, and if you don't understand the oppressions and how it relates to your life and heritage, then you won't be open to others. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. We'll try to do loads of questions, but let's invite the rest of the panel up and introduce you to them. Okay, so we've got a fantastic panel. We didn't sit in order, so I'm going to work backwards on this bit of paper. Right, so first from me, we have Dr. Rajinder Dudra, who is the Director of the Centre for Screen Studies at Manchester University and author of Bhangra, Birmingham and Beyond. His academic interests are in the area of Bollywood cinema, Black British representation, popular music, diasporic and transnational media, television studies, and in cultural theory and qualitative research methods as applied to popular culture. Next, Karen, who you've already heard from. Next to Karen is Martin Harding, who's an ex-superintendent of the Greater Manchester Police and a founding member of the National Black Police Association. Next to him is Ramiz Sloan. Ramiz has been involved with Union Street Media for over 2 years, having first been involved in a film project called Emerging Voices, and now has a paid position at Union Street as an editor. For those of you who don't know, Union Street is an innovative social concept organisation that delivers community initiatives through media and arts. And finally on the panel, David Hanson, who's over 30 years experience as a popular drama producer and scriptwriter, and has produced and written for Coronation Street, Hollyoaks and Brookside. So we've got a great panel here this evening. I just want to start by asking a question to the panel while everyone else works out what they want to ask. Have you seen something on television or on film recently which you thought has captured a multi-ethnic society well? And have you seen something which you think has been less helpful? Virginia,
all right, okay. I was actually surprised by EastEnders of late, actually. I mean, as most of us will know, it's part of a British soap opera, so it's partly sitcom but also a series. It often has dysfunctional characters, but I think partly over the last few years, it's had a serious attempt at inclusion. Now, the actors or the characters are still dysfunctional. Stop toasting them. No. So they're still dysfunctional, but actually, the Asian family of late have been interesting, not least because they are kind of eclectic EastEnders or Londoners, as Londoners with Asian heritage, some of the black actors as well. But also they've been broaching issues of class and sexuality as well. And this gives us a kind of a rounded profile about them. They're not just problem characters, although they are in a dysfunctional situation sense or a soap opera sense, but actually we find out a bit more about them, either in terms of class, background, or in terms of their sexuality. So I thought that was actually interesting in one sense. I mean, there's still much work to be done, but that was a step in the right direction.
Is there something that you think is less helpful?
Less helpful. I think generally each time I switch on the news, so just whether it's global coverage about how like Pakistan is full of terrorists, or Afghanistan is bad, or Somali pirates, there's a lack of kind of wider knowledge of why that is. So, for example, Pakistan's connections to colonialism, it's part of India and then it's broken up, so there's clear colonial histories that are part and parcel of these problems. The issue of Somali pirates, now social pirates on the high seas doing damage, is somehow almost kind of risky, but also adventurous and a nice story. But actually, those seas have been roamed by international companies, there's been pollution in the seas by multinational, and that sense of history is divorced. So we get, again, maybe biased or at least a refracted sense of media coverage, and that unfortunately goes on daily.
David?
Without wishing to copy, I think I would agree with EastEnders because it is probably the most successful of the soaps, and one of the soaps that tries again and again and again to create a more rounded picture of a society, of a community like that. I think the other soaps, some of the ones I've been involved with, haven't ever really done that fully and properly.
Is there something you think is going to be less helpful?
I guess. I mean, I've got many children, some young teenage boys, and again.
About the programme because unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't watch the soaps, so I've missed everything in EastEnders and Coronation and Emmerdale. I'm not a soap fan. But I'm just going to talk about the media in general and how because of where we live today, we're in Manchester, we tend to see the media written from a pro-Western perspective. And when you look at the conflicts that we've seen in Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan, it tends to reinforce the anti-Islam feeling that pervades around the community, and it tends to an extent ignore what the Western forces are doing there. It talks about the negative side of Islam as opposed to some of the negatives we see, whether we should be there or not. So for me, it's a general perspective that the media takes when reporting on conflict, and it reports in a pro-Western stance. I would imagine, again, if we were in Islamabad or we were in Kabul and look at the media there, it would be a pro-Muslim perspective. So it depends where you live, is a perspective that you are fed, but that tends to reinforce, the values and the perspective we then have on what's happening, globally.
Okay, one thing I really like, again, not about a specific program, is how, let's say BBC Three, for example, there's a lot of young ethnic people that have made shows, come up with ideas that get their shows sort of put onto there, get trials, so we're getting more exposure essentially. One thing I'd say was bad would be the fact that if you have too many ethnic people on a show, that becomes an ethnic show, that becomes aimed at ethnic people, it's for them. But if you have too many white people on the show, I'm just saying racist, I'm not being racist, right? People get really watch, but it's like the way they target at these people. So it's like so racism.
And Karen, you spoke eloquently about kind of the grand scheme of history, but is there something contemporary television that you think is good or less good?
I really like Waterloo Road because I think that it covers a diverse range of cultures without trying too hard. And I just like the fact that you see kids with a massive afro that's kind of not perfect, you see girl energy, you know, you see right across the board, and it covers issues just, you know, in a way that you remember when you go to school, that those are the issues that come up. I think it's very well written, really well covered. Like everyone else, and I know my fellow friends in the media, we get infuriated by the news. Just because a lot of the times when they discuss anything to do with race, it's very much from the perspective of it's very stereotypically covered. So if there's always the black person is a gang leader, it's like the riots last year. It's like how many more gang leaders can you find to talk about riots? Why can't you find a black businessman or somebody else like that to cover it? It's not covered in the way that it should be. It doesn't seem to change year on year.
So it's interesting that somebody talked about power, really. So the people who have the most power seem to be able to control the message that comes across in the media. What is it that we want from the media? What is it that we aspire to from particularly from our public broadcast?
I'm assuming like new stuff, just a truthful, unbiased sort of news essentially. So if you talk about something, let's say conflict in the Middle East, or let's say Palestine versus Israel, you're not talking about one side, you're just talking basically each standpoint as it stands. I think that would be from a news perspective, yeah.
Right. So from news, you want impartiality, but from beyond the news, what do you want?
I think beyond the news, a lot of it depends upon ourselves. When I went to university, one of the things I was taught to do was look at both sides of an argument and research it and make up my own mind what was right for me. And the point you make is very well made. We need to look at, you know, the pros and cons of both sides of an argument and make up our own minds. Because is there a right side or is there a wrong side? I think what we're seeing today in the media, because it's so one-sided, if I could say that, and it is not objective, it just tries to reinforce the stereotypes that we're fed on a daily basis. And of course, we take those stereotypes onto our own lives and we make our own value decisions based on the stereotypes that we have been fed. So we saw, you know, the history there with the black youth. And to lots of people, you know, black youth equated to crime, unemployment, you couldn't trust them. And it still continues. And we need to be able to, because you in the future, you know, you are going to be the change agents for what takes place for the next generation and the generation after. So you need to be objective in how you view the issues of today. And don't just be guided by what the media says or what, you know, a programme says. Make your own mind up.
In the future, this is the present. So let's not put it off till another day. Virginia.
I think I partly want accountability and I want eclectic representation. I think the public service broadcasters like the BBC need to be taken into account. All of us, or some of us in the audience, maybe we're not at the age, but certainly our parents, or very soon, will be paying licence fees. So they have an account to us, to represent us and for us. I'd like to see eclectic representation in front of the camera. I'd like to see varied stories about men, black, Asian, white, living alongside each other, the problems they face, how they are as human beings. I want to see that in front of the camera, but I also want to see that eclectic representation behind the camera. I think too many of the graduate schemes, whether we like it or not, are going to white graduates. Where are our black and Asian graduates? Where are the opportunity for black and ethnic minority representation behind the camera? When these scripts are made, whether it's about inner city troubles or the riots or about eclectic beings, who's reading these scripts? Are these groups of white, middle class, middle professionals who are reading them, or is there a group of black and Asian people on these panels who get to read them? A really interesting example is a film that we probably know, Bend It Like Beckham, who people will see that or know of it. Gurinder Chadha's, that famous one about the football, and obviously invoking Beckham in the British sense. Now, believe it or not, that film almost did not get made. The reason was partly because it was funded by public money. So when the script was made, the script went to a series of readers. And Gurinder Chadha has gone on record. So if you look at Gurinder Chadha on YouTube around Bend It Like Beckham, she's gone on record to say that one of the reports that came back, which almost did stop the film from being made, was, I don't understand this script, and I've never heard of or never seen an Asian girl kick a football. So I don't think this is a believable script, and I don't think it will have wide appeal. Now, thank goodness for the tenacity of Gurinder Chadha, she fought tooth and nail for that, and then she also was connected. That film got made, and it was a huge global success, not just for the British film industry, but also for eclectic representation in the sense that it deals with interracial romance, it deals with racism and colonial issues as well. So I want accountability from our public service broadcasters. It's too easy to let them off in the new media age and say, oh, new media or YouTube or BBC Three is the way forward, even though that's part of BBC Three, is part of the kind of PSB remit. But I want to see eclectic representation and accountability in front of and behind the screen. And this is something that's not just now in the present, it's been going on since that wonderful talk with Karen gave, and the images as we saw have been since then. So in some sense, in a visible present sense, things have moved on, but actually in a structural sense, things ain't changed much.
Then when you're in the presence of major popular drama, do you think, are you thinking through, is this a good space in which you can address racism or?
It depends on the programme. Depends on the brief you give, like the people who commission the programme. Depending on like copying Virginia, because the people who commission programmes, they're the people holding power. And in my 30-odd years of being in front of these commissioners and working for them, I have not met one person who wasn't white and middle class. And so therefore the whole thing, the way to change it is to change it from within, but it's very difficult to get within. And I mean, I've been doing some talks in the Media Trust in universities. So I've been talking to lots of media students who are the future of the industry, and there's very, very poor representation there. I was in the locals the other day, John was, I think there was one black guy in the whole 25 people who were doing media. And so I desperately want to see people behind the camera. In the story teams that I've run over the years, and EastEnders must be different. I've got to presume it's different. Coronation Street, to my knowledge, there's never been a black writer on Coronation Street. When in Brookside, there was one guy who wrote with me who was black, and he then again wrote for Hollyoaks. You're talking about 30 writers. So, you know, therefore, you'd be relying on people like me and my experiences to come up with stories for commissioners who don't necessarily want that. So you have to change from within, but you've got to get people within to do it. And that's what has to change first and foremost.
And Karen, what's your aspiration for the media? What is it that we hope that it will deliver?
Yeah, I agree, a more eclectic representation, and also I think that just people to ask more questions when they are working from within. That often people just, you know, they're not as open-minded as you think people are working from within. That's the big misconception, just in terms of, you know, never mind black or white persons with their, when have you ever met a Chinese person that works in the media front or back? There's been one I've met who was told was too serious. You know, very, very good programming, but you're too serious for this entertainment world. So, you know, it sometimes asks questions about, you know, where are people who could inform that particular story. And sometimes, you know, people get within the system, they don't speak up enough because the fact that it's going to be injected right out, but that's the only way that it's going to change, I think.
Before I go to mine, one thing in my question rules, there's a couple of mics here. Someone will come to you with a microphone. There's one question, maybe, three rows from the back, from Greg.
Mine's more of a comment rather than a question as such. I do believe media is a very, very powerful tool, and I think it can actually work towards, I wouldn't say it can get rid of racism, but it can work towards that. But I do think at the same time, I see media being a problem also in this. And the problem, I think you sort of mentioned this or addressed it, a problem in a way that media looks at stereotypes. When you look at a lot of programs, they're a very stereotypical image of a black person, of an Asian person. So I mean, for example, even EastEnders, yes, it's good that they're portraying Asians and Muslims, but at the same time, it's really sad that they're not portraying, a Muslim woman as I would see her, as I think a lot of people need to see her. And unfortunately, I will have to say a lot of people make their mind up and they see what they see in the media to think, right, I understand Islam, or I understand, the problems of a black person because I've now watched EastEnders and Waterloo Road. Again, the depiction of a Muslim girls having issues with hijab. For me, yes, it was a good issue, but at the same time, I was quite angry because I work in a Muslim school and I have girls who are very confident wearing the hijab and don't have a problem. So we need to see all sides of the argument. I don't have an issue with seeing a homosexual Muslim on TV, but at the same time, I think there needs to be like all sides of the argument, including, whether it's Muslim.
To advertisers in a particular kind of way. But then what's also interesting, coming back to this kind of media proliferation and 24/7 media, actually there is a challenge not just for PSB public service broadcasters like the BBC, but actually even Channel 4s and the ITVs, because in the 24/7 media age, we now have an increasing proliferation of BME channels or channels which are catering to ethnic, community, religious, of all kinds of needs as well. Now sometimes the representation on some of these channels can be questioned or suspect or problematic themselves, but people are switching off and maybe switching over to them, or are switching on and kind of having a mixed palette of broadcasting. So if even our commercial broadcasters are not able to tap into that audience base, they will lose that audience base and potentially they will lose that audience, that advertising revenue. So there is a relationship there between audience and advertising, and people need to think savvy about their business models. So they need to produce programs that are going to connect with people, have people on the mainstream channels, and hopefully that will still, it doesn't break the capitalist model, but at least then we'll perhaps have eclectic advertising, so we're not just buying bleach or whatever, but actually there might be some other eclectic services or community services that we want to tap into as well. And this is where the satellite channels are really interesting because they're niche, they're locally based, and people are pick and mixing what they're watching with mainstream as well as satellite. So there's a challenge there that lies there, and perhaps a model to think about. It doesn't completely do away with the capitalist model, but I think people have to think long and hard and far and wide across that.
Martin, I'd like to come to you to respond to the point about role models. Because people say this, I hear it regularly, people say, well, some of the challenges that black men face in particular are because all their role models are hip-hop artists, and the media follows in that vein and gives us Top Boy, Bullet Boy, One Day, that whole list of gang movies that's where you see young black men on television. I mean, is that the media's fault, or are people gullible to believe that these are role models?
I wouldn't say it's a media fault. I would say it's a cultural fault, and it is a cultural issue. I've been working with a primary school in Hume for 16 years now, where within the school they speak 28 different languages. I'm involved with the school because I was born around the corner of the school, and they're crying out for positive role models in society. And if I look around this room and say how many people in this room truly believe that they could aspire to be the lead, a prime ministerial role within your lifetime, well, imagine not many people would expect that they have an opportunity to get to that level. We look at the States, and I think, for me, I was aghast when Obama won the election in the first time because, it's difficult for, I personally believe it was difficult for a black person to achieve that goal. We saw the issues he faced in his first term, and people now realise that he's only going to do another 4 years. So some of the barriers have already read in papers that are breaking down, and they will start to work with him. But in terms of role models, when I talk to the kids in school and ask them what they want to be, these are kids who are 8, 9 and 10. And most of them want to be footballers because they see the successful black people as footballers. They want to be doctors because they see, very, very, quite a number of people, within the health service. But what we're trying to get them to do and recognise is to aspire to be whatever they want to be. Because when I look around and with my experience, opportunity does exist. And one of the kids, many, many years ago, from this school in Hume, went on to have a successful t-shirt business. He went to Los Angeles, grew his business, and he's now come to the UK. So it is possible, but he's not there as an everyday role model. He's an exception more than a rule. What you see on a daily basis is a rap star, and we've had a conversation about some of the language that is accepted amongst, you know, certain music genres that people today take as that's where we can speak. Well, for me, we've all got to work together to take, you know, the issue of culture forward, if that makes sense. Because some of the words that are used, many years ago, people died to eradicate those words from the dictionary. And we've got to recognise that some of the words that people use in everyday language are wrong, but they seem to engender what is taking place. I hope I've made sense there with what I'm trying to say. So I don't think it's a media thing. I think it's a cultural thing. I think we've got to work, and because working with culture, it's a long-term project, so we've all got to be part of that.
Reece, do you think that young people young people in particular, are willing to follow the role models that are presented to them in the media?
I think if anyone has a brain, they can make their own opinion based around it. Now, I don't follow media role models. I don't talk in a certain way because I had a hip-hop person say it, I don't do something like that. But I was raised, I've watched, obviously we've all watched music videos, I've watched documentaries, action movies, whatever. It's not, I think it's like, for me personally, I didn't take a role model because I didn't need to. Like, I didn't have the need to go look for that in the media. So I think if kids, I know that's more of a parental issue, but like, if kids are growing up, it's not a matter of, oh, will the media, are they just going to watch something and be like, oh, that should be who I want to be? It's a matter of if they watch it and then they know, if you know better than something, then you don't want to do it, or you know, if I wanted to talk that way, I would, essentially, my point. So it's more about what they want to do and what they want to become, essentially. So I forgot the question.
Some of them want to be footballers, and they do aspire to be footballers, and particularly the black boys, disproportionately, a lot of them do become footballers. But when you look at how many of them become Premiership managers, or even managers, then there's something systemic about them not getting to be managers of the Premiership. What's that all about? It's the same in the media. So people aspire to be the chief executive, but they're not getting to those positions. Why?
I've also done research and I did a documentary about black managers, and the interesting thing is when you speak to footballers with money, they don't even think about that until it's too late. They don't think they can own a football team, they don't even think, that they can follow what Jay-Z did and buy a team. It doesn't come into their psyche. They don't think that they can become the chief executive. So if they don't think that and they're not talking like that, how is somebody who's going to be looking at Rio Ferdinand and think that they can achieve something higher than Rio?
Just to put it back to the main topic of our discussion, which is about the media, I wonder if the media's got a role in that. I mean, are we expecting the media to present these kind of aspirational characters that we all approve of? I mean, does that make good television? I mean, Dave, when you're writing, thinking, I've got a black character, so I've got to make him the bank manager who's a very outstanding member of the community, or can he be all sorts?
I personally like to think it could be all sorts of things. I think the character comes first and that follows. But an example of when I was producing Coronation Street, the show I'd worked on previously was a courtroom drama, and I'd cast Alan Halsall, who's now Tyrone, and I cast his best mate as a young black lad. And in that particular drama, they were brilliant together. They were so good and they were so funny, and they became friends. And when I moved over to Coronation Street, I needed to find a son for one of the main characters. So I not only cast Alan Halsall, I thought I could bring this other lad with him because they got on so well. So I made them into a twosome, and they were supposed to be fun lads, 15-year-old, in tons of trouble, but lovable rogues. And we had a story for them where they came onto the street and they got into a bit of bother. It was nothing, neither one thing or the other. And somewhere down the line, in the story conferences where anything's up for grabs, someone suggested they break into a house and start playing music and That's all they did. They just broke, and it was Tyrone who actually broke the window to get into the house. I didn't give it a second thought, because I just thought of them as characters. And of course I was killed in the press because someone said the typical middle-class white producer brings in a black actor and has him break him into a house, the first thing he does. And it didn't occur to me, and it didn't occur to anyone telling the story that we'd done that very thing. You know, we just had these two characters and just drove them.
So is there a kind of higher threshold that we're expecting from black characters than we're expecting white characters?
Yeah, it's a point you make, and I don't think it's up to the media to portray our role models. I've seen programmes, I saw 24 many years ago where they had a black president. I've seen Morgan Freeman play the role of black president. It's not to actually get Barack Obama that you see it in real life. The point you made about men like Beckham, you know, Muslim women, Asian women don't play football. Until you see it in real life, then it's just a TV programme, and lots of people realise it's not real. What we need to see is people achieve and you know, not get the hand out, but get the hand up to make sure that we've got those role models in every sector of society so that the children today can aspire. They can see that it is achievable, because at the moment, you know, lots of things are just on TV. So I don't think it's a role for the media. I think as a society, as a culture, we've got to support people in achieving, you know, ourselves and identifying those people to go forward and be the role models for tomorrow.
I'll come back to there's a couple of points. Two on the back of the far side.
Just to come back to the point that you made about having the black and white character and then having a look at it and then you just think that it didn't occur to you. I think that generally that is.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Sorry, I've got a sore throat. Did you hear what I just said to the lecturer?
Do you want to do it again?
What he just said about the fact that it didn't occur to him that he'd sort of typecast this character into this stereotypical role. I think that is the problem, is that it just doesn't occur to people. But then again, that's not a reason or an excuse, and that you still need to take responsibility for having, you know, having put that script in there. It's the same, not just, you know, for black. It's people of colour, it's gay people, it's the way that women are cast, and I don't think that saying it didn't occur is okay. I think there needs to be a lot more responsibility coming from that.
Do you have questions?
Is it Karen?
Yeah.
Hi, I agreed with what you said earlier about how just because the minority becomes the majority doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be more of us getting into powers of position within the media. So what do you think is the answer? Do you think that as people of colour we should be trying to almost infiltrate these white majority organisations like ITV, like BBC, or should we all just take our skills and go to things like The Voice or BET that are kind of black owned and aim at the minority? Should we all just do that and cater for ourselves? Is there any point in trying to infiltrate white organisations?
There is a point, but I also think that myself and some colleagues I think a certain generation got too obsessed with trying to get into just BBC or ITV, and we didn't, you know, people didn't look at CNN or didn't look at Al Jazeera. There were lots of options, and I think people shouldn't just be focused on trying to get into one organisation. You can always go back to that organisation, so I think we should diversify. And also, point that Rob made, just touched on it, we don't complain enough or praise enough programmes that we do like. An example is, if, for instance, I always use this example, Name Cherry and Andy Oliver had a cookery programme that was on BBC Two, had really good viewing figures. The audience log says, you can tell it's clear that BMP someone brings in, get that black person off the telly. That's always happened when there's a programme like that. But there's nobody who liked the programme, whoever phones in and they come to their comments or said this is a great programme. And that's also, it's not just about being within that organisation, it's about if you like something, say that you like it, you know, for instance, you know, the point about casting a black character who breaks in. I'm one of the person that will go, why do you do that? But also, if you think that person was great, or that character say it was great, but rather than just go, I don't want that character in anymore. Because that's also what happens in soaps, is that people really bash EastEnders, and then the people who make it just go, oh, I'm just going to leave that alone because I don't know how to deal with it.
That's very true.
Virginia, you made a point, I'll come back to you in a sec, but Virginia made a point on Friday about Citizen Calm, and about the number of people who phoned in to complain about Citizen Calm. Do you think,
And the figures were high, though, weren't they? A lot of people watched it. That was
right.
yeah.
So I'm wondering whether that makes it more risky to make programmes like Citizen Calm, whether you think good or bad. That's a representation of Muslims on mainstream British television.
Risk is good, and I think we need risk. We need risk takers, and we need people to be able to, willing to think about new scripts, new ideas, presenting them differently, as well as having an eclectic cast, as well as thinking about the production team, but also listening to the audience as well. So much to BBC's credit, whether you liked Citizen Calm or disliked it, they are going to commission a second series, so that's great. Hats off to them. So have they already though got a script which is in the same mould as the first season or the first series, and they're just going to carry on with what they had, or actually will they perhaps think about some of the feedback they had? So with Citizen Calm, when it started off, the first few episodes, it had over 3 million, almost, not quite, but almost touching the top end of 3 million, and almost 4 million in the first couple of episodes. So one, this says something about people still wanted to see eclectic representation on television, and definitely this was the first in the sense of British history, not least post 9/11 and post 7/7 in the UK. But by the end of it, by the 6th episode, it went down to almost just over 2 million. So within 6 episodes, it lost almost over 1 million viewers. Now that's saying something. So fair play to BBC that they're going to commission a second series, but also viewing figures dipped and dropped as well. Also, there was things said about, in a sense, it was a mixed response. Either people liked it or loved it, or they completely hated it because it took us back to the 70s and 80s and they were these stereotypes. So should stereotypes not exist on TV? Maybe not, or maybe they should. Or should stereotypes exist alongside a more balanced media where if that character who broke in just happens to be black, but he breaks in because of his character, he would have done that irrespective of where he does that? Where is the counterpoint to that? So if we switch to another channel, or later on that evening for another programme, with a balance, or someone who is still a character, human like us, with their flaws, but also doing something else. So were we going to see a programme later in that day, or early on in that day, who was a solicitor, who was a lawyer, who was a doctor, or the issue was completely different? It wasn't about breaking into the house. Chances are not. And that's why, when we see these few and limited representations, and we're in bloody 2012, we still see these limited representations, which are far and few between. That's why that issue still matters. That's why we're still contesting and arguing over Citizen Calm, whether we liked it, whether we disliked it, whether this was a good representation or not over British Muslims, because they come and go, or they're far and few between. The balance is not there for to have those stops and checks about varied and eclectic and diverse representation.
Just want to ask about Citizen Calm. Who's seen Citizen Calm? Who thought it was a good show? That's interesting.
I didn't take it seriously. I was like there, they're like having a laugh. That was it really. Didn't see the whole like. I mean, is it working? I mean, like, I mean, to me, I've got quite a funny sense of humour, so for me, I find quite a lot of things funny, but I didn't see it as in, like, this out way. I just saw it as, this guy's could be, obviously the dad character, he could be anybody, you know what I mean? The way he was carrying himself. I kind of found that part funny, but I didn't see it as in, like, oh, it's just the connotations or... Because I've got Asian friends, I've got black friends, whatever. So for me, in that aspect, I wouldn't see it as, I don't see people as in like colour-wise, you know what I mean? As far as I'm concerned, anyone can be anybody, you know what I mean? As long as you're...
So sometimes we didn't enjoy it as much. Quite frankly, people would say, why did you fight?
I think the problem with Citizen Calm was the fact that people couldn't relate to it. I mean, it's one thing if you live amongst episodes you hear about in newspapers, and it's all extreme. And if you've got something to balance it off, then that's fine. But when this is all we're seeing, all we're hearing, you've got certain groups who think, well, this is what the Asian community must be like, or this is what the Muslim community must be like. So I think that the media needs to understand what it's doing, as it's causing a lot of damage in a sense.
So it seems that there's a worry about the kind of pressure we put on a particular show because it's the only representation. If there were 15 sitcoms which had mainly Muslim characters, it may not make that much difference. There won't be 15 sitcoms with mainly Muslim characters, I can promise you. Right, there's a question here and then I'll come back to this gentleman later.
I was just wondering if the panel could perhaps comment on this. If the panel could comment on sort of international influence in the UK, as well as the UK, sort of different cultures you see in the UK and how they're sort of viewed by different people in the UK. There's not, I haven't heard much tonight about how we sort of see cultures around the world. So I was just wondering if there's any views or any comments you'd like to make.
Okay, and then there's a final gentleman spoke before. Well, it's these two.
I think we're all giving the media too much credit and expecting the media to provide role models and show us the way, etc. I don't think the media does lead, I think the media follows. I'll give you the example of BBC Radio. If you remember when the BBC started, was it 60 or 90 years?
90 years.
90 years, okay. So when the BBC started, they played no pop music, had a no pop music policy, and so these pirate stations sprung up. I'm talking about the old Pirates Radio Luxembourg on boats out in the North Sea. In a response to that, the BBC started Radio 1, which played pop music. 20 years later, by that time, Radio 1 was outdated and stale. Pirate radio started again, the Black Pirates in London and major cities around the country. And so in response to that, the BBC did one extra. So the BBC and the media in general is responding to what's happening in the real world, and they're lagging behind by some years. So in response to the point that Sister made up there about should we try and infiltrate the mainstream, I think no, because they're so far behind and so behind the times, we have to create what we want to see. And then maybe in 10, 20, 30 years' time, the mainstream media will say, oh, this is actually happening here, maybe we should start reflecting that. But we can't sit and wait for the media to show us what's happening, because they're 20, 30 years behind, so we have to do it for ourselves. One other quick point about that, and new media. Now, I have a 15-year-old son, and he's obsessed with Xbox. And he watches this guy on YouTube, this black guy calls himself KSI. And it's just an image of this guy playing games on Xbox and talking about it. And I can't understand what the appeal is. Why would anybody watch someone else playing a game? But this guy gets millions, literally millions of hits. And now he's been sponsored by games companies. They fly him over to games conventions in the States and get him to review games. I think that is the future. Rather than us sitting waiting to see some black guy reviewing games on BBC or Channel 4. That's not happening anytime soon. Go onto YouTube to watch and also to make our own programs. So I think we have to lead the media, not wait to be led by the media.
Thank you. Quite from the gentleman in the grey top. And we'll take one question and we'll come back to it. So,
yeah, I agree with taking responsibility of our own communities and empowering our communities to create community cohesion. So the media is always, for me, is going to stay the same. I don't see any change, and I'm not willing to be part of that change in the media. It's about making your own change and creating your own opportunities, dividing what you've got and making the most of it. But for example, I'm part of community forums, debate groups. I'm part of organisations that are leading to process achievement and aspiration on young black males achieving within the education system. That's what I'm doing with dissertation at the moment. So for me, it's about empowering more young black males to get educated, and for me to see more inspiration and something that I have a passion for. That's why I want to take this further.
And the media's role in that is like
well, the media are always stigmatising black males as thugs or gangsters, which is a negative image. And when young black males are doing positive things, they're not broadcasting the media or doing positivity or look at that young black male, he's got 8 A stars or he's just achieved a scholarship in the university. We don't hear about them things in the papers. We always hear about the robbing on the street. or he's committing a robbery or something, we never portray it in a positive way. So if we're portrayed in a negative image, then obviously society are going to hold that stigmatization, which represents society as, you know, marginalised, labelling people. So in order for it to change,
what you're doing.
well, yeah. So that people perception is what we're brainwashed by the media. Most of the stories are biased and sometimes silently racist. So you have to be careful what you read and what you listen to. And if you actually speak to people in the community, they might tell you a different story. You know, like Moss Side is portrayed as a negative, or it's Gunchester, or this and this. But if you go and speak to people in the local community and you find out some of the issues and things, there's a lot of positive people doing a lot of positive things, but they're not talked about. You know, like good organisations like the Powerhouse, doing a lot of excellent things with the young people, but they're not portrayed by the media as doing good things. Like youth and community work is not seen as a good profession.
So we've got one more point just up here. Thank you for that.
Hello everyone, I was coming to the point where we're talking about music and media, because I think that music, especially around the world, has a big influence on people's lives and perceptions of life. For example, hip-hop, how was that started? That was started by Jamaica going over to America and created that genre, that style of music, and it was created from deprivation and the lack of things for the black minority of the United States at that time. Likewise, reggae was born out of a rebellion of the colonialist powers of Jamaica. And where media comes in is that over the past, the history, of course, like British country, they always had to have a bad person portraying the media, a certain type of person portraying the media. Back in the 60s, I believe it was the young black male. Nowadays, it generally still is the young black male, but with added features, aka young people, yobs, hoodies, people with a hood up with cold, will be deemed as a criminal. And as for the media taking responsibility on account for cultural diverse aspects of people's lives, I think it's half and half. I think they should be aware, and I think they should be culturally aware, but also acknowledge that the people who are financing these projects and the people who that are sanctioning these projects are white middle class. So how far can they go in understanding the pressures and issues that other cultures may face?
Full range of questions there. A few questions to think about, because I know you've written about Bollywood. I'm just thinking about some of the different influences on the British people that have much more.
Okay, yeah, just to respond to that point, what's interesting about the international and British connection is, first of all, let's just pause and think about the representations of Britain that go overseas. Often, this is 2012 now, often these are English representations that go overseas. What am I talking about? Heritage drama, costume drama. There's no accident that these are game figures, and in some senses, eclectically within Britain we're watching them, but Britain, through these books, are also projecting a certain image of Britain overseas. And again, Welsh, Irish, Scots, never mind the blacks appear in a particular kind of way. So there's a relationship there between how Britain still packages and constructs itself overseas, and why we're harking back to this 18th, 19th century where black people existed there. Yes, we arrived in our masses in the 50s and 60s, but actually, if you go back to the history records, there are black people buried here in Britain as part of the slave trade, but also after as labourers, as tradesmen, as merchants, and so forth. But they very rarely get depicted in these costume dramas or costume melodramas. And again, it's a in terms of the international influence, this is something you can't ignore. It's everywhere. It's there in the popular media, it's there in film and television, and we've talked about some kind of fusion examples. And coming back to the Benny Beckham is a good example because it's partly British, it's partly mixed, but it's also Bollywood as well. But actually, I don't think it's just that the media simply follows. I think we are the media, and the media is who we are. So those examples of the guy watching the gaming, that again is in millions, but it's only in the millions if you're into gaming culture. The vast majority will still switch on telly at some point of the day, at some point of the week, or it's where, in the first point of call, these representations exist. And these representations matter, not just because they're textual and they're constructed on television or film for us, but they matter because it's through them we get to a sense of each other and what we think our neighbour is like. This notion that Muslims or Asians are still like this, or the blacks are like this, or hoodie is still like this. And not too long ago, these representations in the 70s and 80s still mattered because through sus laws and stop and search, people were treated in a particular kind of way. So when the truncheon was still allowed, and then over the August riots, shall we bring the truncheon back in and shall we give police more powers to stop and search and do certain things? This had a direct correlation to the representations that existed about certain groups in the media. So when black youths were stopped in the 70s and 80s, and we saw and heard that in one of the films, the truncheon came out and people were actually hit. They were hit because the media said the only way this group of people, this black man, will understand you or respect you or stop and listen to you is if you use the force and you use the cane. And where have we seen and heard that? Back in the colonial day.
In the mainstream, yeah, it does often follow what people are picking up on. But I would say now, picking up on the point of international arts as well, that what's so difficult to enforce is that there are so few of us within there that when we talk about something that can be incorporated into the mainstream, there's not many of us to talk about that. And so the arts, just, covering the arts or culture is still in the domain, not only in the white middle classes that work there, it's the other classes that work there, or the broadcasters who've been there for a long time, like Alan Yentol or Anthony Ward and Nate Torino. Because we are now always talking about Rihanna or talking about, we're not talking about in our shared experiences of ballet, plays and Rihanna, those people who are in those high positions, they do talk right across the board. And until we kind of think as young people, if you do want to engage in film or television, be aware of those other mediums, whether you're interested in them or not, because otherwise you can't sit around the table and discuss culture and how you're going to impact on organisations like the BBC. That's why they're behind, because they want to know why they should cover. They do ask really basic questions which will shock you, why should we do something on Beyonce? Because there is somebody in the world of opera that we should cover more. And if you can say that this person is the equivalent of Beyonce, then you can get that moving forward. But if you can't, you can only talk about one particular area, then it gets, that's why the BBC is behind, because it gets thrown away.
Right. People have posed a kind of different, a kind of challenge, I guess. And particularly at your stage in your career, are you thinking the trajectory will be into one of those big institutions, or will you to start your own institution?
Oh, right, yeah, no. I suppose one way, well, the initial idea when you first decided you're going to be in the media industry and stuff like that was, get somewhere, make it into like a big place, or do that. Personally, one thing that I've kind of figured out while someone was talking and kind of got shown up was, I don't know how this much relates, but if you're good at what you're doing, you'll get work, essentially, especially if you're like a freelancer or something. If I was like really, really good at, I'm an editor, so if I was really, really good at it, I could go to the big places, or I could go to an independent place like Unitary Media Arts, I could go somewhere and get work. So and when I started off, I kind of thought that was my main idea was, I should definitely try and apply to BBC, ICTV, one of the crazy big places. But after more understanding, I'd say, no, not anymore. It's not, my main priority is just being good at what I'm doing.
And Martin, there is this notion when you work for the Black Police Association
want to join, and we all want to be part of the large organisation. But in order to be part of that large organisation, the large organisation has got to recognise the difference and actively support the difference. And I touched on before that I spoke with Clark Carlisle about the PFA, and I suppose that's pretty relevant to the point I'm trying to make now. We've heard in the media that to have a breakaway black players' union would be negative. Well, they wouldn't need a black players' union if the PFA recognised their issues and dealt as actively with their issues as they deal with other issues. You know, we talk about the lack of, professional managers. We've got one in the Premiership who's doing very well. You know, Chris Hughton, eight games unbeaten, they've beaten Manchester United. So, unless organisations are prepared to recognise and fully support difference, then there will be a need for individual groups. And I say that because we have the Black Police Association, we've got the Gay and Lesbian Police Association, we've got the Muslim Police Association, we've got the Christian Police Association. And the reason that you've got individual associations is because they don't believe that their views are represented by the mainstream police federation. So in order to be part of the mainstream's got to recognise you and work as hard promoting the minor groups as it does representing the dominant majority groups within that organisation.
And also, I think people should, if their family members do go into institutions, be more supportive. You know, a lot of black people say the families they don't understand it, they're not supportive, it's really quite difficult to break through. Loads of your family joined the police though, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
quite useful though. What's that about?
Yeah, okay.
Started
a trend, yeah. 5 in total. I come from a large family, and one of my brothers now is a police officer out in Vancouver in Canada. But we've got representative Manchester and the Met. The police service, I mean, it's a difficult question because I joined an organisation that was, and to an extent still is, racist, sexist, homophobic, every ism you could think of that existed. And you saw the caption before where there were 2 police officers speaking, not in uniform, but one was the former Chief Constable, James Anderton. And James Anderton, at the time of the riots, was also very, very anti-homosexual. I mean, he talked about homosexuality, or homosexuals, as living in a cesspit of their own making. And that was the culture of the organisation. Another police officer saw on there, his son was actually killed in a terrorist incident in Manchester. So the organisation was racist, sexist, homophobic. To an extent, it still is. Because if you look where the senior black people are in the organisation and the senior females are in the organisation, they are not represented according to their ability. They're almost represented according to tokenism. And until we get an organisation, I'm going to pick very quickly your point before you made about intrusion. I saw intrusion. I was part of the thematic inspection, the national thematic inspection, and black officers felt they had to infiltrate various sections in order to achieve. And my position is that I don't think that the police and other public sectors have the integrity to promote from within. And for me, the only way you're going to deal with this is that you take away the power to promote, because the power to promote is the power to have power. You take that away from organisations, and I think you need a totally independent, neutral system to make sure that the senior positions within organisations, police and public sector, are given on ability, not on who your mate is and who you went to school with.
That's a really, really important point. Then I'll just come to you. There's a line from this film which keeps on bouncing back to me, which is great power comes great responsibility. See what kind of films I watch. How do you make how in a role like a producer of a popular drama, do you make sure that your script writers are responsible, that you're using images about race responsibly?
There are many, many checks and balances. It's first and foremost, you're always, any program you make, you're responding to a brief from the commissioner. So there'll be a very specific brief. So you're working to that brief, and really you're working to that brief to the exclusion of anything else that might come in. And but it is absolutely every it's not just the responsibility of the producer, it's every creative person's responsibility around that table to tell that story, whatever that story might be, to the best of their ability. And then that includes, you know, a degree of ethnic involvement. Then you have to be. See, I've always had this thing of, you know, if I wanted to create a nation family on Coronation Street, would it be beholden on me to produce it to actually go out and find Asian writers to come in and write about their experience? Or should I trust the writers around my table and my researchers to go out and do the work and bring the stories to me?
I don't know what the answer is.
No, I've never known what the answer is. I mean,
I think you have to have some religion, you do have to have. But it still has to be considered, but you do have to have somebody right from their perspective. But I mean, you know, you could still have somebody who's, it depends on the person's identity, doesn't it? That's the other thing is, you know, what that person's identity is, you know, how do they perceive themselves? Because I think that's a problem that EastEnders faces because, you know, is it going to be somebody who still writes from that stereotypical position to please the commissioner?
I tried a few years ago to get a programme off the ground that was based on an Asian ex-policeman, and he was the lead in this story. And I was working on it with a white writer, and we were determined we wanted to do this because it hadn't been done. This is going back a few years now. And so I went out and I spoke to a lot of Asian people I knew, to presenters, I spoke to a couple of writers, and I actually approached the guy I wanted to act in it, who was acting in something else at the time. And I went through all the stories with them. I said, and with all three of these people, are we on the right track? And they would say, yes, we would very much like to be involved in that. Now, it never got commissioned.
Right.
I still think the media in this country is part of the problem and not the solution. And when in the 60s and 70s, all the families that were living together in a kind of, you know, neighbourly way, there wasn't mass culture in terms of television exposure to the media like there is today, and all this, you know, beautiful language about equal opportunities and community cohesion and living together. It's a lot of, well, I can't think of the word to describe it. But the thing is, Martin, your point was crucial because even the PFA, they won't get the black union together of footballers, but when Rio Ferdinand and his brother is racially abused, they want to make them the victims. The media won't make them the victims.
I'm conscious that we're now running over time, so I think we should talk about GetA, but probably just not right now.
But it's the media. I'm not talking about PFA. I'm talking about how they use it, how the media use it.
Fair enough, but let's see if we can draw this to a close, and then we can have a broader discussion afterwards over a drink or two. But this has been a really rich discussion, and covers a huge amount. I want to leave us with at least kind of a forward-looking conclusion rather than kind of down in the dumps. I mean, what do you think the future holds? What is it that we want to get to from where we are? I suspect that we can't recreate the past. There will be some great moments, there will be some less good moments. What do we think we want to do? What do you think we want to get to, and what do you think the next step ought to be? David, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think it's partly a dereliction of duty and responsibility to say we don't want to be part of the bigger movement, we don't want to involve it, we don't do that, so we're just going to do it on our own, because that way we will never break the walls down, the walls will never be broken down. And there's a big desire within the BBC to become more accountable. It's their job to become more accountable. I think they're the best hope. We've got to change some things. The problem with a lot of television these days is that with the death of regionalisation, everything has been now London-centric. It's very difficult to get things off the ground in the regions that, if they still existed, we might not still be here. We're still going to be a kind of different discussion. So I still think that we should be trying to break down from within, as difficult as that might be.
Personally, just the way I feel it's going to go, is the way it's been going now. It's going to be, we're going to have, the more vocal, it's going to bring people have more discussions like this. People will take it on, and people get more vocal about what they want. And the more you're vocal about it, the more the chances of it becoming something. Because we can all sit here and talk about, oh, yeah, ITV, the BBC, whatever. But if none of us went out and did anything, not that none of us have, by the way. Just saying, if none of us went out and did anything, obviously we wouldn't do anything. So I think just the more I see is probably just going to be like, there's going to be quite a few more as years, more discussions, more people are going to want to make change, and the more people that want to do it, the more it's going to happen.
I don't want to sound negative, but I just think we've literally missed a huge opportunity. We've got a golden hour at the moment. We've got the Leveson, we've got the Savile, we've got the issues of the females in the BBC, being under 50 and being beautiful and gorgeous. And there's a whole range of issues on the table that are current. And we've had an opportunity with the appointment of a new DG for the BBC to bring somebody in who will grip the opportunity and take us all forward. But we've recruited from the establishment. And the problem now with the recruiter from the establishment is he's got his mates to please, and he's a friend of Patton's and he's a friend of this. And so I think, unfortunately, we're going to get pretty much more of the same. Instead of bringing somebody in from the outside saying, let's just stop. Let's have a change. What's happened so far hasn't worked. And we need to do something different. But we've gone for a guy who is going to be a safe hands, and I think we're going to get more of the same for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and maybe, 15, 20 years we'll be having this conversation again, because the BBC as a media hasn't taken us forward, and the point you made before about, we should lead rather than let the media lead, hasn't been gripped.
We've got Twitter now, we can change things on Twitter.
Perhaps we might have to spend a lot of time tweeting to get that done, but Karen.
I think that the changes will kind of happen, because of social media and because of people using YouTube, mainstream television is kind of listening to that, and so it's moving forward. And also, because of that, young people don't feel excluded. That's one thing is, certain cultures feel excluded from taking part in mainstream media, but young people still feel that it's their domain. So that will move forward. And also, going away from the BBC, Uma King going to Channel 4's Head of Diversity has already started to make a massive impact, because even had people at BBC thinking, actually, they have to do things a bit differently. And I just think there needs to be more appointments like her, but people need to shout up for more people like her to become involved in television.
Just one quickly, I don't want to wait 15, 20, 25 years for change. I don't mind these conversations as long as we have them regularly, periodically, as long as we have stock checks and we have accountability. Change is now, we are all change. Change is possible. Like most of you and millions around the world, I cried when Obama was elected, but I almost laughed when the Republicans were trying to stop him to get into office in the second time. And the reason for that was not because he was doing his job badly, but because he was a black man and the race was covert and it was implicit. And that is what we're up against in various spheres of life. And we need to stop, reflect, and challenge that and intervene in that. And then changes in 15, 20 years, changes now. And I'm going to be part of that kind of change.
Thank you. So we've come to the end of our formal time here, and I hope you'll agree that there has been a really great conversation. It's sparked loads of thoughts for me, and I hope it has for you as well. There are a lot of people to thank. Firstly, Chorlton High School for giving us this wonderful space. I'm really jealous to have this kind of thing around the Our partners who've helped us put together this project, Media Trust, the North West Film Archive, the BFI in London, the Black Cultural Archives, the BBC, I've been slagging them off all evening, and the Academic Well Resource Centre at the University of Manchester. All been really helpful, and it's been really great to work with you. I need also to thank the rest of the team at Runnymede and Ojiaku, who's worked tirelessly on bringing these three projects together, and let you know that we're making a short film, which we'll make sure we send to everyone whose email address we have sometime in December. It'd be really great if everybody could just send it on to a couple of people and keep that discussion going, because I think there's lots of ideas in here that it'd be really good to hear other people's views on. The other people that I need to thank I nearly forgot, but I couldn't. The people who made this event so possible. Karen, for such a fantastic lecture, and thank you again. But also the other panelists, so Dr. Regina Didro, Martin Harding, Ramiz Moen and David Hanson.